Support comes from BECU, a member-owned credit union putting people over profit, offering financial services and support to the community with access to local financial centers, over 30,000 ATMs, and online resources at becu.org. Federally insured by NCUA.
Hey, good morning. It's Patricia Murphy. It's Monday. This is Seattle Now. Maybe you've noticed the fall foliage is a little less dramatic this year. Turns out that's one way trees react to the stress of a changing climate. We'll hear more about what the region's birches, hemlocks, and firs are dealing with in a minute. But first, let's get you caught up. Mayor Durkin will attend a memorial for Assistant U.S. Attorney Thomas Wales today, 20 years after he was shot and killed in the basement of his home on Queen Anne. The case still hasn't been solved, but the Seattle Times reports that the FBI is again looking into a longtime suspect, a former pilot once prosecuted by Wales. Investigators believe the killing was a revenge hit carried out by a drug cartel on the pilot's behalf. The Times says the feds may be getting ready to charge a group of people who were either involved or hampered the investigation. Seattle's monorail reopens today after a month-long renovation to make things faster and easier to use. If you're riding from Westlake, you'll be able to board the train at all 8 doors now. One other change to speed things up, no more ticket agents in those little booths. It's all Orca cards and ticket machines now. Officials are hoping more hockey fans will ditch the car and ride light rail to the monorail for those Kraken home games. And stash the candy chute. King County's public health officer says Halloween is on this year. Trick-or-treating is a safe outdoor activity for children, according to Dr. Jeff Duchin. He says plan to stick to small groups, like family or people you regularly socialize with. Take a bit more care with indoor events, especially if there may be unvaccinated guests. You can always wear a face mask under your costume. It's fall, but you wouldn't exactly know it from looking out the window. The trees that usually signal the changing season with a blaze of color aren't popping like they usually do. And that's partly because this past summer was anything but normal. First, there was record-breaking heat right as the summer kicked off, and the lack of rain. By August, things were pretty dusty. It took a toll, not just on us, but our trees. Raymond Larson is the curator of living collections at the University of Washington Botanic Gardens, and he says you can see the effects of this summer and climate change more broadly if you know where to look. We met up at the Arboretum where he showed me where you can see the damage. He led me around the park in an electric golf cart where we looked at birches and hemlocks, trees that usually thrive here. But now you can see climate change's toll is obvious. All right, so we're going to hop in the electric cart and you're going to show me some trees.
Yep.
All right, let's do it.
Do that. And, this thing doesn't go too fast, but there can be a few bumps, so try not to hit any speed bumps without giving you a warning, but it happens. We have a grove of western hemlocks, the official tree of Washington State, where you can kind of see some of the stuff I'll be talking about.
Let's go chat.
So we have a grove of native conifers across from the visitor center, and representing kind of the big three locally: Douglas fir, western red cedar, and western hemlock. And the western hemlock is kind of the dominant successional forest tree. So it in typical forests, it's the one that comes along last because it's shade tolerant. And here's one just to the left, which is much sparser and thinner all throughout the canopy. And so that's a typical sign of what happens, especially after a few years of less than normal water, particularly in the right time. So what we've been seeing is not only do they get sparser, they produce a lot more cones. Even a lot of trees will flower more if they're under some stress, which is a little ironic, but if they could talk, they'd be saying, trying to preserve the next generation, I'm about done.
Right, they're sending out signals to continue their existence.
Right.
I'm curious, in your concern-o-meter, your personal concern-o-meter for what's happening here right now, where are you at?
Well, it depends on the species, but for hemlocks, extremely concerned. They are kind of the canaries for us amongst our native flora. And then other species that we have a lot of, such as birches in particular, and some of these other deciduous trees. But birches is the one that we've seen this great shift in the last 5 or 6 years, really since we started getting longer periods of dry during the growing season and hotter summer temperature. And it used to be a tree that you could kind of plant and forget. You didn't really have to give it any special care. It was pretty durable. But what we've seen is, since these are now getting more stressed out with this change, that's when the insects that are here already are able to take advantage of that stressor and really move in for the kill.
Let's go see some birch trees if you got some birch trees to show me. I know. Raymond, how long have you been here?
I've been in my job as curator, I think this is my 7th year.
Oh,
now.
wow.
And then I've been with the university in various horticultural capacities for almost 25.
Oh, you're a UW alum.
Yeah.
That's right. I read that about you.
Yeah, I've got my graduate degree here in urban horticulture, which is very relevant these days because urban horticulture is kind of how plants respond to the stresses of city environments. And what we're seeing in the cities, since there's a hotter, kind of a heat island effect anyway, is kind of what is a little bit predictive of what is happening regionally now. It used to be the cities are going to be 10 degrees hotter and also warmer in the winter, but now they're even hotter and the rest of the region is kind of catching up to what the cities used to be.
You know, I wonder, I go back and forth between people's theories about whether or not this is a new normal or this is just a changing, an aberration.
Yep. Yeah. And so, when we first started seeing this, it's like, well, maybe this is a year or it's not. But we have, weather and rainfall records going back 80 years on site. And just even if it is like a blip in terms of a decade, it's going to do a big number on all of our living things. It's easy to forget that a big old tree is a living organism sometimes, but just like people, if they have other stresses, then other things can happen more quickly.
Yep, we're all vulnerable when we're stressed out, Raymond.
Yeah. Okay, we're almost to a nice big Birch Grove. But, fall colors here and there for sure. It's just like this year especially, but then, in general, it's going to be maybe not as good, a little briefer. Because when plants are stressed, they tend to shed their leaves earlier. They tend to kind of want to save up for next year. Okay, let's take a look. We'll just hop out here.
All right, let's see what you got to show me.
This is a nice look at what's happening generally to our birch trees. You can see the white trunks that are very, most people know birches, bright white trunks, very popular in urban landscapes, especially the Himalayan white birch, which is used everywhere. But what we started seeing probably 5 years ago amongst certain species in less optimal sites, and what I mean is, but less drainage, less overall kind of perfect conditions, which again, birches had done just fine with. We started seeing some tip dieback and then defoliation of the upper part and then eventually lower. So when I first did my assessment of this particular area about 4 years ago, these were all looking fine.
Oh, wow.
And very full, bushy, and, quite dramatic in the winter. But here you can see there's a bunch in here, several different species that at first appeared to be like maybe these are resistant. They're not showing the effects we are seeing elsewhere. But they've lost their tops. There's a lot of side branches missing, a lot of defoliation, and only the green part is really at the lower part, and a lot of sprouts at the base, which is another sign of stress in many trees.
I'm looking at these trees, and I can see you've cut all the tops off.
Yeah, in many cases we haven't. They've just,
fallen?
The insect has done their job, and then they've fallen, yeah.
I felt physical relief for my trees when the rain started,
yes.
Raymond. I did.
I did too.
I really did. Where are they at right now?
Yeah, they're still catching up. It was interesting. We got that first kind of nice rain a couple weeks ago, and then didn't get anything for about a week, and I could still see some of the trees and some of the evergreen bushes starting to kind of, they were relieved, and then they're like, oh wait, we're still not where we are. So like rhodies would start drooping again and things like that. But now that we've got another good chunk, and we should be, I don't want to say home free, but we're in much better shape now. So all the damage that has been done, and we're just going to have to wait and see till next spring what kind of things show new leaves or what don't. So it can take a while to show up from these yearly events for sure. But what we're seeing here is, spring. That's why conifers are king around here, is because most of them can handle that 2 or 3 month dry-ish period, but then they really like that rainy winter because their roots are still kind of growing, and they're able to kind of dominate for that reason. The reason we don't have that many deciduous trees is, besides the glaciers, is because unless you're in a spot like near the water or river or some kind of source of somewhat consistent moisture, they're not as equipped to tolerate our summer dry period any year, but especially these years.
Should we think about that when we're planting trees on our properties and in our neighborhoods?
I think more and more, for sure, and especially in urban areas where that heat effect is exacerbated. Natives are still a great choice, but it so much depends on the soil too, because urban soils or developed soils are nothing like native soils. They've lost all those associations, and the soil's been mixed up or compacted, so it's not as easy as solely focusing on those. But one of the things we're doing at the university now is we have a project with other Western universities called the Climate Ready Landscape Plants Project.
All right, that's...
And so from Arizona, California, Utah, Oregon, and Washington, we're studying many of the same sets of plants to see what their tolerances really are for water and other environmental factors. So we have a lot of anecdotal evidence of what's drought tolerant, but we're using plants that are typical in the landscape or that there's interest in commercially and for growers to see which ones perform well and might be most resilient to the changes that we're starting to see.
I've always heard, though, that it's really important to stick with native plants and native trees.
It's really important certainly to have them as a component of your landscape. I would say any landscape, even one that's designed to be very ornamental, should have a solid component of native plants, because they evolve with our native insects and pollinators and our climate. But it's becoming less true, certainly in urban settings, where you really want things, if you're looking for a kind of a successful mixed garden, to have, first of all, a good variety, but then a variety of things that are more adapted to hotter and drier.
Mm-hmm. You studied trees for so long. Mm-hmm. It must be hard on some levels to see this.
Yeah, definitely. I've long admired birches and many species of them, and I'm growing up here a particular fan of conifers and things. So when trees that have been in the landscape for decades or longer start showing problems, it is troubling, and it is, it does make you feel sad.
People feel a real connection to their trees. It's personal.
Yes, and I think, during the pandemic, people have kind of grown to rediscover, being outside is good for you. It's good to be around nature, and when that's suffering, it's a little hard to take.
Yeah. Raymond Larson, really good to talk with you. Thanks for the tour of the Arboretum, even if it was a tour of trees under stress.
Yes, it's always great to walk around the Arboretum, and it's easy for me to forget all the great things because I tend to focus on the things that aren't performing like they used to, but it's still a joy to be out here.
Hey, thanks for listening today. Follow us on Instagram at Seattle Now Pod. We'll have some pics from the Arboretum. Caroline Chamberlain Gomez produced today's show. Our production team is Clare McGrane, Diana Opong, Jenny Cecil Moore, and Jason Pagano. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Patricia Murphy.